أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد ثم الصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين لا سيما مولانا وسيدي صاحب العصر والزمان روحي وأرواح العالمين له الفداء وعجل الله تعالى فرجه الشريف ولعنة دائمة على أعدائهم من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. For the hastening of the return of our 12th Imam, Imam al-Hujjah, one salawat upon Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. We continue this evening in our commemorative sessions for the remembrance of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam and the martyrdom of his family and friends on the plains of Karbala. And we remind ourselves every evening in this month of Muharram that we are doing our best to become better believers, to follow in the mission of Abu Abdullah, and that we pray and hope that we are able to join with the revolution of our 12th Imam, Imam al-Hujjah, when he returns to bring about a reformation to human society, to reform the society that has and will continue to deviate away from the teachings of the Prophet and his family and the teachings of the Quran. And we ask Allah to give us the ability to follow in the footsteps of Abu Abdullah and of all of those who have paved the way for us to remember the supreme sacrifice of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salatu wassalam. As you'll recall that we've been going over various topics in this series to try and better connect with ourselves, to try and understand the world that we live in, to try and understand our surroundings and the ever-changing world and the very changing times that we live in. We've gone over multiple topics since the first night where we looked at that theme of spiritual but not religious. We've touched upon the demonic temptations. We've looked at the opposite end, which is the divine promises from Allah. And we've looked at also, last night we looked about the salat, about the prayers, and the need for us to reconnect to Allah in a better way, to make the most of our salat, to make it count, and to make it be that transformative action or event within our lives that Allah has wanted us to be able to derive from the 5 daily prayers. Tonight we want to continue in these various themes and look at another aspect of life. What does the Quran speak about it, and what are solutions to the challenge? And so this evening we want to look at the concept of having a meaningful life. Why is it that some people cannot find happiness in their lives? Let me begin with a verse of the Quran which comes to us from chapter number 16, Surah An-Nahl, verse number 97. And although this is a particular verse I want to quote, but the theme of it comes up many, many times within the Quran. Allah uses this concept that we will soon see in this verse many different ways. In this particular verse, again from chapter 16, verse number 97, Allah says, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, Man amila salihan min dhakarin aw untha wa huwa mu'minun. That whoever does an act of righteousness, and it's interesting here, let me just pause and say this, that Allah could have stopped it right there. Man amila salihan, whoever does a good action. But you know, there were times in Medina especially, and even I think in our society today, you know, in this era where we have to have inclusivity and people feel, well, you know, if you're talking about men, then you should talk about women. We know that in the workplace, there's this entire push to have gender equality in the workplace, whether it's in the realm of the federal government or local politics or in the business world. They want to ensure that women have equal representation. And there's nothing wrong with that. You know, as Muslims, we would say as long as women are maintaining their religious decorum, and as long as men are maintaining their religious decorum as well, the hijab of interaction with the opposite gender, we don't have an issue with women working outside. There's no prohibition in Islam about that. So Allah could have just said, Man amila salihan, but He says, Min dhakarin aw untha. Why did He have to do that? Why did He have to say, whoever does a good action, man or woman? There could be multiple reasons, but I think we can focus on the fact, as I said, that even at the time of the Prophet, there were some women in the society who were saying, well, this religion of Islam, these aren't their words specifically, but the notion was that they felt Islam to be a misogynistic religion. They felt Islam was a male-dominated religion. They felt that all of the ayat coming down to the Prophet had to deal with men, their rewards, their responsibilities, their reward with Allah, their spiritual reward in the akhirah. And so many times, whereas Allah would never had need to use that phrase man or woman, Allah goes out of His way to single both those out, both of the genders, male and female. There's an example even in the Quran, I believe chapter 33, again, where one of the wives came to Rasulullah and she complained, saying that the women of Medina are upset. Well, what are they upset about? She says that, again, all of these ayat about jihad and about this and about that are all about the men. Where do women fit into the Quranic narrative? And that verse comes down, إِنَّ الْمُسْلِمِينَ وَالْمُسْلِمَاتِ وَالْمُؤْمِنِينَ وَالْمُؤْمِنَاتِ وَالْقَانِتِينَ وَالْقَانِتَاتِ وَالصَّابِرِينَ وَالصَّابِرَاتِ. And it goes on and on and on to say, believe Muslim men and Muslim women, believing men, believing women, patient men and patient women, submissive men, submissive women. Again, not that Allah had to, because Allah could have used the words in Arabic which are gender neutral or that include male and female. But Allah wanted to emphasize to us in the Quran multiple times that, look, when it comes to rewards from Allah, when it comes to divinely appointed responsibilities and acknowledgments from God, men and women have the exact same reward. Nobody can say that if a man prays a 2 rakat salat and a woman prays the exact same salat in the exact same prescribed fashion, that they would receive a different reward. No, they would receive an equivalent or equal reward because they've both done the act in the exact same way. So Allah says, "Man amila salihan min dhakarin aw untha wa huwa mu'min." So whether you're a male or you're a female, you do works of actions of righteousness and you are a believer. This is also a clear indication that we have in Islam, that it's not only about belief or only about being a good person, right? We talked about that on the first night. Spiritual but not religious. I am a good person, but I don't have to follow the religious dictates. I don't have to wear hijab. I don't have to pray. I don't have to fast because I do good. Right? And people say, well, look at that person. They're wearing hijab and they're doing bad. At least I'm not like them. So I'm just going to do good. Here Allah shows us, brothers and sisters, that Allah says you do actions which are righteous, actions which are viewed as in the religion as being good deeds, and you have to believe, you have to have iman. Now, Allah will reward people that do good actions that don't believe in Him, but their reward will be limited, it would be curtailed. They would not receive the maximum reward, we could say, in the world to come. Allah will give them something in this world because Allah would never be unjust and Allah would never take away the returns a person should get based on the good deeds that they do. But Allah wants that combination to be there of belief and action. Action and belief, they have to be united and harmonious with one another. So what happens when you are a believing man or woman? You practice the good actions of religion. You have that conviction in God. Allah then says, فَلْنُحْيَنَّهُ حَيَاةً طَيِّبًا, that we will cause that man or woman to live what He calls this hayatan tayyiba, a pure life, a very godly existence, a very pure and wholesome organic lifestyle they will lead. وَلَنَجْزِيَنَّهُمْ أَجْرَهُمْ بِأَحْسَنِ مَا كَانُوا يَعْمَلُونَ. And Allah says, and we will reward them with the best of actions, with the best of returns rather, because of how they acted in the life of this world. So this verse, as I began with it, In this topic that we would want to look at why people cannot find happiness, is really hidden within this verse. Allah is showing us that the goal to happiness is two things. And then from that, obviously, will stem multiple avenues of how to implement it. It's to have belief in God, as we have been looking at in many of our discussions in this series. And with that belief is to be a righteous human being, to perform those actions which are expected from a believer. Now, we live, and I'll come back to this verse a bit later, but we live today in a society of extreme opulence, extreme riches. Canada is probably one of the most wealthiest countries in the world. We as citizens live a very comfortable lifestyle. We are blessed with so much, right? Not only the geography and the territory, the land. Economically, we have great benefits. We have a pretty decent healthcare system. We have social security. We don't have wars that we're fighting. We don't have a lot of civil strife, or any civil strife, I would say, within our borders that we see in other parts of the world. But yet you still see that people are not happy. You still see that people are wanting more and more stuff. Money is something that everybody wants. And again, we talked about this a few nights back, that there's no problem with wanting money, having a good job, having a good career, having that wealth which Allah has blessed people to have. But there are times where it becomes an unattainable goal for some people. It becomes a goal they're constantly and continuously running after, that they can never get what they want in life. This world that we live in is, although again we have so many benefits, but there are people still looking for more comfort in life, bigger homes, nicer cars, a better job, all of these things which are there, which in and of themselves are not bad things, as long as they're done for the right reasons. But unfortunately, what we see in the world today is that these things are becoming trivial pursuits. People are thinking that if I have a better job, then I'll be more happy in life. People think if I'm just making, a six-figure or seven-figure income, then I'm going to be happier. If only I have that 5,000 square foot home overlooking, on one of these high mountain peaks in hills in Calgary, then I'm just going to be completely content with life. If I have that, brand new shiny car in my driveway, that's all I need to be happy and content, and I won't want anything else in life. Just give me these few things and I'll be happy. People think like this, right? Maybe even some of us, we may see people that have a very fancy and rich and luxurious lifestyle, whether it be our neighbors or homes that we pass by on the way to the center, or we see these television shows of people that live these very luxurious lifestyles. And we imagine, well, what if I was in that life? What if that was me in that home? What if I lived that comfortable life? Then I would be so happy. I would be so content. I wouldn't want anything else in life. People who think that, we should realize that according to a statistic, they say that in 2018, so that's just 5 years ago before COVID hit and transformed our world, they say in 2018, Canada, with all of the benefits and the blessings and the beauty of nature that we have from coast to coast to coast, Canada ranked number 3 out of the 23 industrialized nations for people who are using the most antidepressants. Can you imagine that? Out of 23 of the most industrialized nations in 2018, so 5 years ago, before COVID and before lockdowns and before many people were facing real mental stress and aggravation and depression and anxiety, Canada ranked number 3 out of 23 industrialized nations of nations where antidepressants were on the rise. That signals something, right? When you hear a statistic like that, that shows us that there is something wrong with the system that we live in. right? Or not even that we live in, obviously that what we live in, but this is a global phenomenon. There were some other facts and figures I read online that said in America, from between 2010 to 2012, and then 8 years later when they did the similar research, that the number of people on antidepressants, it jumped 350% in a 8 to 10 year gap. America, the most richest nation on earth, the most powerful nation, the nation with the biggest military humanity has ever seen, the nation with, the biggest everything, right? Big sandwiches, big food, big cars, big homes, big everything. And yet the usage of antidepressant medication that they could report upon was a 300% increase. At the same time, as we mentioned on the first night, in the last 20 some odd years, the number of people affiliating themselves with religion every year is declining. Right? Within a 10-year span in America, it was like a 10 to 15% drop in people who affiliated with a religion. So on one level, people are less and less affiliating with religion, and at the same time, there are more and more usage of antidepressants. And that's just the ones that are prescribed by doctors, the legal ones. What about illegal drugs? What about the marijuana and this and that people use, and alcohol that people run to cure depression and anxiety that isn't reported in these statistics? So I don't say there's a correlation between a decline in religiosity and an increase in the usage of prescribed and non-prescribed drugs to cure depression and stress and anxiety. But there seems to be something going on in society where we are number 3 in the world, Canada, where we have so much to as we say in English, count your blessings. We have so much to thank Allah for. But yet people are still depressed and going through these bouts. Now, I mentioned maybe even in the Q&A, I don't remember if it was here or somewhere else, but I mentioned that, there are people that are truly suffering mental health issues. We never downplay that because mental health issues, just like physical health, are a reality. And nobody should say if somebody has mental health issues, just read Quran and you'll be okay. Just read Sahifat al-Sajjadiyah and all your problems and your anxiety will go away. That's as preposterous as saying if somebody comes to me and says, I have a heart condition, and I need to take blood thinners and I might have to go for a triple bypass surgery. If a scholar was to say, just read the Quran because the Quran says that it is a shifa lima fis sudur. It's a cure for what is in your heart, in your chest. So just read the Quran and your heart will automatically correct itself. No, that would not be responsible to say. Yes, the Quran is a shifa, no doubt. The Quran can change our lives in ways that we never thought possible. People can get cured from the Quran. There's no doubt about that, right? We have examples and you have hadith and there are, very anecdotal evidence we can say, but there is evidence to show the transformative nature of the Quran in our lives. Right? Very simple example is people that have been the very, epitome of antagonism and hatred for Islam, that they can hear the Quran, they can read the Quran, and they can leave kufr, leave disbelief, leave idol worship, and convert to Islam. Their spiritual heart can be transformed by the words of Allah just by a few passages. So who can say that the Quran cannot change the human being? So coming back to the point is that the Quran and the religion has the answer, but how can it be that people are more and more looking for happiness? They're not going to the source of happiness, which for us as Muslims, as Allah mentioned in the verse I began with from chapter 16, that answer is at the dhikr store. Right? Not the liquor store, but the dhikr store, where we go for the remembrance of Allah. How can it be that people are looking for this spirituality at the bottom of a bottle or in a pill or through many other things, and they're not able to find it? I read a research report. This was actually a joint research study. You can find this online between Harvard University and the University of UBC, University of British Columbia. I think it's about a 10 to 15-year-old study. And the article summary, or the title was, "Money Can Buy Happiness." We have a saying in English that money cannot buy happiness, right? Today you have money in your pocket, you go and let's say you buy the newest cell phone, or you buy whatever it is that you're into. You think that'll give you happiness. You'll use it for a day, you'll set up, you'll put your SIM card in it, you'll transfer your data, you'll play with the phone, you'll get accustomed to it. And then after a week or two, it's just a phone. That wow factor is now gone. And then you'll have to wait for that next spiritual buzz when the new model comes out in a year. And again, you repeat that cycle over and over again, showing us that money cannot buy happiness. But the researchers at UBC, they prove that money can buy happiness. But it's unique. You can read the research online if you can probably find the PDF. But the way that they said that money can buy happiness, and they did scientific studies with hundreds of participants, they found that when people were donating money to good causes, as little as $5, they found their levels of dopamine in their system, that drug that makes you happy, that drug that brings chemical changes in the brain, that happy factor, they began to increase. When the same people would buy stuff for themselves, they had a buzz for a few minutes. It was a spiritual high for a few minutes, but then those levels of dopamine calmed down and they were back to normal. They're looking for that next fix. But when they gave money in charity, when they helped a homeless man on the street, when they gave it to a religious organization, they donated their money, especially their money to a cause worthy, they found those people to be much more happier in life. Much more happier than spending on themselves. That should set off an alarm bell. If we read this research, again, done by not religious people, but scientists who try and quantify and validate everything through modern science, which is at one level, it's good for them to do that because we understand more about the human being, although, the same research could easily have been conducted through the Quran, because we have so many ayat that talk about infaq fi sabilillah, giving charity in the way of Allah. Allah tells us of the otherworldly rewards of up to a 700 or even more reward. Allah speaks about infaq in many different ways in the Quran, not because necessarily the needy need that money, but as our scholars would tell us, that when you give money to a cause, to the Husayniyah or to a needy person or for the propagation of Islam, don't look at it as you are doing the Husayniyah a favor. You're not doing the masjid a favor. You're not doing that orphan when you give to an orphan. You're not doing the widow a favor when you donate to the widows of Iraq, let's say. You're not doing them a favor. The ulama tell us, look at it as they are doing you a favor by taking your money. By them accepting our donation, by them accepting the money that we give, they're actually helping us to fulfill our purpose of life. So when we tend to think as human beings that when I give to a cause, it's them who needed that money, right? They needed the money to build that masjid. They owe me. They should announce my name on the microphone that, Fulan gave $10,000 and everybody should recite a salawat for that person. They should have a room in the building with my name on the plaque because I gave $500,000. I did them a favor by paying off the mortgage, by paying off the loan. No, actually, we need to look at it the other way, brothers and sisters, that when we give and this charity or the organization or the Husayniyah or the orphan accept our money, we're not doing them a favor, they're actually doing us a favor. They're allowing us to get to that level of having the acceptance of Allah. They're doing us a favor that we can reach that level of happiness. They're doing us a favor because all of those ayat that talk about feeding the aitam, feeding the widows, feeding the needy, that we're able to do it. Can you imagine if all of the widows and orphans out there and the needy people said, we're not going to take one penny of your money anymore? What would we do with all of our excess wealth, all of the sadaqat and the zakat and the khums that we have? What would we do with it? Would it just sit in a big box and collect dust? Right? We would have to do something with it, but what if nobody wanted to take it? Right? Like the hadith say at the time of the 12th Imam, there will literally be nobody needy of money. Now that could mean because that there will be a very robust system that the 12th Imam will implement so people will not need to go and look for handouts. Or it could mean that humanity at the time of the Imam would have evolved intellectually, spiritually, that they don't, that they would lead such a life of contentment and happiness that even having nothing or very little would mean nothing to them. Maybe both of these opinions are correct. But the point being is that we need to look at contentment and satisfaction in this life in a different way. It's not just about what we have, but it's what we do with what we have. So I give you one example of this UBC research about people they're saying that when you give to others, as little as $5 was the amount they said, people began to feel happier and more content and more fulfilled in life. I came across another phenomenon, which I'm sure you've heard about, that people have been doing in the world, and in North America primarily, to feel happy, to remove stress and anxiety. We've all heard of yoga, I'm sure, right? People do yoga. You see these TV shows and people are in the parks early morning doing Qi and Tai Chi and yoga and all of these things. But a phenomenon began in America called goat yoga. You know, goats that we eat for dinner sometimes, they grow up and we slaughter the goat and we make kebab out of them. So there's a concept in America of goat yoga. Sounds pretty weird, but what they actually do is they do yoga in a farm traditionally, and they have goats walking on their back and goats jumping over the people doing yoga. And you'll have a person on their back stretching their legs up, and there's a goat on their chest. And they say that goats are very cute, and they're cuddly, and they're friendly, and it's a good way to be happy by hugging a goat. So go and hug a goat and do yoga, and you'll be happy. You'll feel fulfilled in life. You'll feel a complete human being. And you can go to YouTube and see these videos. I was watching them today and I thought, what world do we live in where people can have yoga in a farm with goats all over them, walking on their back, on their stomach, jumping over them as they're doing yoga. And they say this is the best therapeutic medication ever. It solves my PTSD. It solves my anxiety, my stress. I'm going through a harsh, bitter divorce. Having a goat walk all over me is the best thing that I've ever had done for me. And people are paying hundreds, if not thousands of dollars to play with a goat. And yet they look at us doing salat and going for hajj and going to arba'een and they say, what are these people doing? At least we're not playing with an animal, you know? But this is the reality of the world because, again, they became spiritual but not religious, as I said on night one. Right? They want to be spiritual with a goat or a sheep. Right? They don't want to go back to the roots of religion, what God created us with and for. Right? Rather than engaging in ibadah with human beings where we gather together in sessions like this or in hajj or in umrah or ziyarah, we figure that we can have an animal jump on us. And that's spirituality. That'll get us closer to nirvana. And we'll get that state of ecstasy where we're one with the world, right? The yin and yang will balance and all of these fancy terms that they'll use of the New Age movement. But again, we have to realize, brothers and sisters, that happiness and contentment will not come from the exterior. It won't come from outside of us. The verse I began with and the hadith I want to share with us will show us that this happiness in life, this contentment, can only come from inside, can only come from the roots of religion, can only come from what the Prophet has given to us, from what the Imams have taught to us, which obviously is nothing other than what has come to them from their teacher, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So that verse I began with from chapter number 16 at the beginning, where Allah says, whoever does righteous actions, man or woman, and they're a mu'min, they're a believer, Allah said that we would allow them to live the good life, the hayatun tayyibah. How does the Prophet define hayatun tayyibah? What is that pure life? It's a beautiful catchphrase. It's a beautiful, interesting phrase to use. It makes for a nice book title, The Pure Life. But what does it mean to lead a pure life, a happy life, a life of goodness, a life which is tayyib, a life in this dunya which is tayyib? Because we know in the world to come, in the akhirah, life will be pure. Life will all be good in the akhirah. There is no grief, no sorrow, no sadness. There's no anxiety or stress in the world to come. These are all limited to our life here. So when Rasulullah was speaking to the companions and he was giving tafsir of hayatun tayyibah, he says that what this means, and this is just one hadith, but it's one beautiful hadith. He says, إِنَّهَا الْقَنَاءَةُ وَالرِّضَى بِمَا قَسَمَ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى. That hayatun tayyibah is al-qana'a, contentment, being happy with what you have. Not having to keep up with the Joneses. Not saying, well, they have this, why don't I have it? Or my neighbor has a new Tesla, I want the same car. No, it's to be content. Al-qana'a bima qasam Allah. Whatever God has determined that you should have, be happy with it. Have contentment and wa-ridha. Be happy with what Allah has given. Now, this doesn't mean that Allah does not want you and I to strive, right? To try and do better, to try and move ahead in life. No, at the same time, we're told to have qana and ridha with whatever Allah has decreed. We are also still obligated to work hard, to put the effort in, to put in an honest day at work, to struggle at school, to do our best in our business, to promote our own business if we have one. But recognize that after everything you've done, if you have a business and you're putting out advertising and you're doing SEO, you're doing search engine optimization so your website gets at the top of the list so you can drive more traffic to your business, if you're still not making the money that you want to make or that you think you should be making, recognize this hadith, al-qana'a and ridha. Maybe Allah does not want more wealth for you to accumulate. Keep working, keep struggling, but realize that maybe Allah has capped your income at a certain amount. Maybe for the time being, maybe it's a temporary cap. Allah is saying, let me test my servant. Or maybe Allah is saying that, you don't have the ability to bear more than I could give you. I can give you the treasures of the heavens and the earth, but you don't have the ability right now to bear those blessings. But ultimately, look for qana'at, look for that contentment with whatever Allah has given. Look for that ridha, to be submissive to Allah and say, Ya Allah, you have determined for me right now, this is what I should have. I'm not going to stretch my boundaries and push you to give me what might not be good for me right now. Because as we mentioned a few nights ago in that dua of the month of Ramadan, that we would sometimes complain to Allah when there is a delay in the response of the du'as. But as the dua says, that was better for me in the end. Right? So the Prophet says, have that level of contentment. Have that level of ridha of what Allah has determined, and that would be hayatun tayyibah. That is that pure life. Not running after what you will never get, but rather being submissive to Allah in whatever we have. Sallu ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. I'm going to conclude with 3 suggestions, 3 points with how we can begin to cultivate that contentment, that happiness, that satisfaction with life. It's not getting more money, it's not in a better job, it's not in any of the things that we had mentioned that people are looking for happiness in. Again, it's not anything external, it's an internal force that we have to develop and nurture. but some tips or pointers given of how we can nurture that contentment within our lives. One of them, to nurture that satisfaction, that happiness, is to develop a nature of gratitude, of being thankful to Allah. Being content means you are thanking Allah for whatever you have. There's a beautiful verse of the Quran where Allah says, وَإِذْ تَأَذَّنَ رَبُّكُمْ لَإِن شَكَرْتُمْ لَأَزِيدَنَّكُمْ وَإِن كَفَرْتُمْ إِنَّ عَذَابِي لَشَدِيدٌ. And your Lord had announced or made the proclamation, لَإِن شَكَرْتُمْ لَأَزِيدَنَّكُمْ. If you are thankful, I will increase you. It didn't say I will increase your blessings or your money or your fame or your popularity or your likes on Instagram. Allah says, I will increase you. لَأَزِيدَنَّكُمْ وَلَإِن كَفَرْتُمْ إِنَّ عَذَابِي لَشَدِيدٌ. But if you are ungrateful, if you're not going to show thanks to God, then He says, recognize that my punishment is indeed severe. So scholars who have talked about how to attain that level of happiness in life, they say begin to focus on gratitude to Allah. Wake up and be thankful for what you have. Don't focus on what you don't have. Right? Look at the world as being the glass is half full, not that the glass is half empty. Right? Be optimistic. There's a quote which was attributed to Helen Keller, but today I realize it was actually by the famous Persian poet Saadi. So maybe she read his poetry and took it. But the quote basically says that I complained I had no shoes until I saw somebody with no feet. Right? We tend to think, how come I don't have this? That person has more than I do. But we don't look at it as, I have this, but that person has less than me. Right? We always tend to look at people above us materialistically and try to climb up to their level. They have that, I want that. We don't say that person doesn't have that, I wish they had it. Right? We always want what other people have materialistically. We don't say, oh, my friend or my brother, he's financially in difficult situations. I want to help him out. I wish he was at my level. Right? So the hadith even tell us that when you look at people in the dunya, look at the people who have less than you. And when you want to look at people in the terms of spirituality, look at people who are closer or higher in a spiritual world than you. Right? We have to recognize that we have to be grateful. And actually scholars, one of the articles I read mentioned that, in one beautiful way to show the shukr, or to be grateful to Allah, they say keep a journal of gratitude. Go to Dollarama, buy a little journal, a book. It's $2, or if you want to use your phone or your tablet, but keep a diary every day or at the end of the day when you go home and before you go to bed. Ya Allah, address it, Ya Allah, Ya Prophet, Ya Imam al-Mahdi, Ajjalallahu ta'ala farajahu sharif. I am thankful for X, Y, and Z. I'm thankful that I have a mother and father, because I realize in Iraq there are people who don't have a father anymore, or whose mother has been killed, or whose father has been killed. Ya Allah, I'm thankful that I have a husband, because I know in Iraq there are widows who lost their husband. Ya Allah, thank you for a husband. If you're a husband, Ya Allah, thank you for my wife, because I know there are men who have lost their wives. I have friends whose wives passed away in delivery. They're delivering a child in Canada, in the best healthcare system, and their wife passed away delivering their child. Ya Allah, thank you, my wife is still with me. You're a young boy or girl, Ya Allah, thank you for the fact that I have a house over my head, that I have food on my table. Right? Things that we take for granted. Oh Allah, why don't I have this? No, don't think, why don't I have something? Thank Allah, Ya Allah, I have something. Be happy with what you have. Show gratitude to Allah. Because as He says, لَإِن شَكَرْتُمْ لَأَزِيدَنَّكُمْ. When we become grateful for what Allah gave us, He will increase us. We will be happy with what we have. We might only have, a minimal amount of a house. We may have one car in our family. But we're thankful that, Ya Allah, at least I have a car. I'm not taking the Uber everywhere or public transportation. Right? We have to, brothers and sisters, recognize to be have gratitude to Allah, and if it has to be written down every day, so be it, until we get into a routine of automatically, shukran, Ya Allah, thank you for this, thank you for this, thank you for this. But be grateful to Allah and document it, write it down, that I'm grateful to you, Allah, for all that you've given me, and I begin to enumerate every single thing. Number two is, they say that begin to foster meaningful connections with people. Make sure you're in touch with your family. There are people who don't talk to their mother and father. There are people who leave home, young men and women, and they never want to see their parents again. They break off affinity with their parents, with their siblings. They want to have nothing to do with the Muslim community because maybe they were, ripped off or something, or they were insulted when they came to the center one night. But make sure you maintain a connection with family, with friends, with your religious community. Human beings, we are created to be creations that we thrive on community. Right? That's why the Prophet says there's no rahbaniyah in Islam. There's no monasticism. You can't be on your own. Right? The best prayer is in jama'ah. Hajj is in congregation. Right? Ziyarat Arba'in is 20, 30, 40 million people. Can you imagine if only 2 people went to the Arba'in? Like the day that Jabir went, when it was just him and Atiyah, and then the Ahlul Bayt came, and from then till today, now 40, 20, 30, 40 million people come. I've never been for Arba'in. May Allah allow me and all of you to go for Arba'in. I can only imagine what it is like to be walking with millions of lovers of Abu Abdullah, right? Not even going in a luxury coach or a SUV, right? You're going on foot. Millions of people following the same trajectory from one Imam to the other, right? And then from Abu Abdullah to Abu al-Fadl Abbas and back to Abu Abdullah and back and forth. Right? We crave interaction with one another. So we have to maintain for our own mental sanity, our own spiritual sanity, for happiness. The scholars of the soul say, maintain those spiritual connections, maintain those family, friends, religious connections, and keep them strong. Right? Don't ever say, forget about the community, I don't need family, I don't need anybody, I'm on my own, I'm an independent, This is the world that we live in today. You turn 19, 20, and people leave home, they're independent. They don't want to live with mom and dad anymore. They don't want to be with their parents, with their siblings, because now they think that they're mature at 20. Right? You might be mature, but you're going to lack that connection with family. And it may come back to haunt you later on when you find that your friends that you're sharing the apartment with and the money you're making isn't making you happy, because you've broken off connections where Allah wants those connections to be maintained. When you sever the family, as the hadith says, you sever the family, then you sever your ties with Allah. So we have to maintain ties with the family, with our friends, with our community members, in order to maintain the connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And third and last, and we'll conclude with this, is to seek a purpose in life. Right? Life is not just getting a degree, going to work from 9 to 5, coming home, having dinner, watching Netflix, going to bed, hopefully praying in between, and repeating that cycle over and over again. Allah says in the Quran, أَفَحَسِبْتُمْ أَنَّمَا خَلَقَنَاكُمْ عَبَثًا? Do you people think that you were created with no purpose in life? Just to live this robotic life of get up, go to work, make money, go home, sleep, repeat every day till you die? No, we have to become purposeful people. Right? Do something that gives value back to yourself. Give back to society. If you want to volunteer at a local soup kitchen feeding the homeless, that's a great thing to do. I think even in Calgary, I've seen there's a Shia organization where they arrange soup kitchens and feeding the homeless and the needy. Go and volunteer to feed the homeless. Right? I've done this before back home in Ontario, and delivering food to people who have no food, it makes you put your life in perspective like never before. Where you go to somebody who's living on the street out of a shopping cart and you see them eating food that you and I take for granted. Food that we probably throw away in the month of Ramadan, these people would literally be fighting for the scraps that we would throw away. But when you go and feed somebody who's homeless, or you volunteer in a soup kitchen, or even some communities, they create food hampers in the Shahr Ramadan, and they go and even deliver to Muslim families that can't afford to have iftar in the month of Ramadan. It's sad that I've seen this, right? That there are families in our communities in Vancouver, probably here in Edmonton, in Ontario, around Canada, where we have families in our communities from the followers of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam that don't even have enough food in Shahr Ramadan to have a proper iftar. And then we have communities where every day they would weigh the food which is left over, 50, 60, 100 pounds of food thrown away in one night of Ramadan. So volunteer, make your life meaningful, give a purpose to life. Maybe this center here wants volunteers to clean, to set things up, to keep things organized. If they need volunteers, even if they don't come out and say, hey, volunteer, ask the organizers. I have a couple of hours to spare every week. Do you need any help at the Husseiniya? Do you need to maybe paint the walls or clean the carpets, or do you want help organizing the center, or maybe you want to be trained on the AV system to give our brother a break so he can go on vacation sometimes and be away from the center and spend time with family and not worry, will the live feed work? Will there be feedback in the mic? Do job shadowing him. Let him train you. Learn the system, right? Volunteer in any way that you can. It'll give you a meaning and a purpose in life other than just living a mundane existence. Again, and it's not my words, it's people who have studied human psychology. They're saying when you give your life to have purpose and meaningful life, you will see the benefits, you will feel more happy. Again, those dopamine levels that trigger in the brain when you do good actions, you feel that spiritual high, you will feel that because you say, I've accomplished something, I've done something to help somebody other than myself. And what better feeling can we have, right? That I've helped somebody else be happy in life. I've become happy by my own life becoming, doing the good, and I've instilled happiness into somebody else. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Tonight, as I conclude, we want to turn our attention again to Karbala. And I just want to speak about one particular companion of Abu Abdullah. One man who was at the end of his life, I could say. He was in his mid-80s by the time the event of Karbala rolled around in 61. A man whom we know as Habib ibn Mudahir. We're told, although there's a difference of opinion by the historians, but they say that he was, at the time of Rasulullah, he was a companion, or at least if he wasn't a Sahabi of Rasulullah, he at least saw the generation of the companions. But definitely he was with the first three Imams. He was there with Amir al-Mu'mineen, he was there with Imam Hassan, he was there with Imam Hussein alayhim as-salam. And by the time that Karbala rolled around, brothers and sisters, Habib ibn Mudahir, an 80-year-old man, was in the city of Kufa. He was in Kufa, and as we know that Kufa at the time when Abu Abdullah was surrounded in Karbala from that 3rd of Muharram onwards, Kufa became a very hotbed for Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad and that whole apparatus of Banu Umayyah. They were keeping monitors, they were keeping tabs on who was coming in and out of Kufa. They were keeping tabs on all of the people, especially those that identified as Shias of Ali alayhi salam. Because they knew that if Abu Abdullah was to get the support from the Kufans, especially those that had written the letters, that they may not have a chance in that battle of Ashura. But historians say that somehow Abu Abdullah was able to get a message, a letter to Habib. And we're told that the letter was written, it got to Habib in the middle of the night. Him and his wife and his one son and the servant are having dinner in the middle of the night. And there's a knock at the door. And when they go to the door, it's a man with a letter. He gives it to Habib. Habib opens the letter, he reads it, and he goes back to the family. His wife says to him that, who was at the door? And Habib says it was a messenger from Hussein. And she's startled. She says, how is that possible? What is it about? What's going on? And Habib says, well, Hussein is, outside of Kufa in Karbala. He's stuck. This is a situation, and he's remembering me. He wants me to be there. At the same time, brothers and sisters, that evening, Abu Abdullah has flags. Right? Within the army, every group had a flag, right? And that flag and the flag bearer was responsible for the morale of a group of troops. And Abu Abdullah was giving everybody a flag on that night. But there was one flag that Abu Abdullah held. And every companion said, Ya Hussein, give us that flag. What about us? And he said, no, the one who is the rightful recipient, he's still not here, but he'll be here. He meant Habib, brothers and sisters. And so Habib goes into the house and into that area. He tells his wife and the servant and the son that, look, Hussein wants me, but I'm not going to go. I'm not willing to risk my life. Now, he didn't mean it. He was testing his wife to see, is she really ready to give up her husband for the sake of Allah and for the sake of Abu Abdullah? And when she heard this, she was shocked. She says, Habib, you lived your life with the Ahlul Bayt. You were a staunch supporter of Ali, of Hassan, Hussein, alayhum assalam, and now that Hussein is in a difficult position, you're not going to support him? She says, if you're not willing to go, I'm willing to go and give my life. And our son will go and he'll sacrifice himself. And that's when Habib told his wife that I knew that you had it within you, and I just wanted to make sure that you were ready to give your life, because that means that you're ready for me to go as well. And I'm ready now to go and give my life for Abu Abdullah. And so they say that he prepared, he did his farewell to his wife, to the family. He told the servant that you go, you take my horse and meet me outside of the gates of Kufa. I'm going to try and sneak out and get to you. But if I don't make it, if I'm caught by the forces, you have been freed for the love of Allah, and you go and do whatever you want. You can go to Hussein, or you can be free as a free man. And so the slave, we're told, makes his way outside of Kufa. He's waiting there. In the darkness of the night, he's talking to the horse, and he tells the horse that how can it be that if my master doesn't make it, that I go and be a free man? And Abu Abdullah would wait, and he would die, and he would be killed without the support. He says, no, if I am freed, I'm going towards Abu Abdullah. And through the shadows, Habib is hearing this in the darkness, and he says to his slave, he said, I've heard what you said. He says that you are hur, you are free liwajhillah, for the love of Allah. You go and do whatever you want. But he insisted that I'm going to be with you through thick and thin. And so we're told that they make their way through the darkness of the night of Kufa and the desert. They reach towards Abu Abdullah. And at the darkness of the night, because there's fires burning, you can see some, shadows, you can see the dust coming. And one of the companions says, Ya Hussein, I see dust. I see a rising of dust in the air. Somebody's on their way. And Abu Abdullah recognizes that must be Habib, my childhood friend, that one that was with us from the early days. And sure enough, as they get closer, that is Habib. And Abu Abdullah hands him the flag, the standard bearer. And Abu Abdullah says, welcome, oh my dear uncle Habib. And Habib embraces Abu Abdullah. And subhanAllah, one of the first things that Habib says after he greets Abu Abdullah and laments over that situation, he realized that Sayyidah Zainab alayhi salam is there. He asked Abu Abdullah, because he heard Sayyidah Zainab convey through one of the men of the family. They came to Habib and they says, my dear aunt has given you salams to you, O Uncle Habib. And Habib breaks down in tears and he says, who am I? Man mithli, who am I that Zainab would come and give me salams? So he says, Ya Abu Abdullah, give me the permission to go to the tent of Sayyidah Zainab and just say salam to her, to respond to her salams upon me. And Abu Abdullah says, go ahead, my dear uncle. And Habib goes and he sends his salams to Sayyidah Zainab and the women and the children. And Sayyidah Zainab says to him, she says, oh Habib, that be there for this gharib, for this lonely man, this one who everybody else has abandoned. Be there for him on the day of Ashura when everybody else will be gone, when the family will be killed and the companions will be killed. Oh Habib, you be there. And definitely Habib was that man that when Sayyidah Zainab prayed for him in this way, that he was there for the Ahlul Bayt alayhum as-salam. Because when the dawn of Ashura came on the 10th of Muharram, and Habib had that opportunity, although he was 80 years old, although he was a man of weak body, of frail body, but he had that love of the Ahlul Bayt alayhum as-salam. And as all of those other companions would do, that Habib would make his way into the battlefield. He would announce his name in the poetry that he would announce, and he would begin to go into the battlefield. And as all of those brave soldiers on the day of Ashura, as each one of them would go and fight, and they would be attacked, Habib would also do the same. And eventually Habib would also be attacked. He would fall down from his horse. And as every companion would let out that final salam to Abu Abdullah, that Habib would say that farewell to Abu Abdullah. And Imam Hussein would rush from the tents. He would rush towards his friend from early days, and he would take Habib in his arms, and he would lament over the fact that Habib, a man of his age, a man of his stature, has to lose his life on the day of Ashura, has to lose his life in this way. But just as Habib had been with the Imams in the days when he was young, and just as he was ready on those days to give his life for the Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam, that he gave his life on the day of Ashura, he gave his life for Sayyid al-Shuhada, and forever he would be remembered as one of the eldest Shuhada on the plains of Karbala. وَسَيَعْلَمُ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا أَيَّ مُنْقَلِبٍ يَنْقَلِبُونَ إِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.